Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos and welcome to my guide to Motherlode plus 18. This is showing you the route that my group uses to clear this place. So the first thing that we're up to here is our tank is actually trying to prevent the infested from going off on this first set of 3 mobs. You can do that by throwing a chi burst through that little barrier before the keystone starts, but he got there a little bit late because he was getting a food buff, so we didn't actually end up preventing that infest from going off, and that makes this pull take a little bit longer than we would like. But the goal is to just get this set of 3 laborers out of the way real quick, because the affixes active this week are Sanguine, Necrotic, Infested of course, and Fortified. So the trash pulls themselves are pretty annoying, and particularly those small mobs like laborers will stack Necrotic up in a really annoying way. I'm sapping that refreshment vendor over on the left because we don't want to pull that pack, and that'll make it so we have a little bit more space before we actually aggro anything. And then we're actually letting every single mech jockey get piloting a Peacekeeper because we want the extra % from the Peacekeepers. We think they're pretty easy mobs, and so our focus here is we're trying to kill the refreshment vendor. Obviously we're killing off the laborers, and then as soon as we're done with this refreshment vendor, we're just going to chain into the next pull. And you can see here the Sanguine is actually healing up the Peacekeeper. That's a little bad. We lose some efficiency on all the damage we had dealt on that being healed up, but that's fine. We're just going to chain this into the next pull, and as always our focus is on the refreshment vendors. And the refreshment vendors have 2 really important casts. Ice Spritzer, which is a huge damage channel on one target, and if that keeps casting, it will kill them, and even if it doesn't kill them, if the channel finishes, it stuns them if they're close enough, and that's really bad. So we have to have 2 kicks on Refreshment Vendor because they do that cast, and they do a cast called Kaja Cola Refresher. So we also need to kick that because that's a heal. Then the Addled Thugs, a little bit less of a threat, but still a higher priority than the Peacekeeper. The Peacekeeper we're really just keeping here and slowly killing it over the course of this, but it mostly is ignored. The Addled Thugs do a charge that stuns somebody, and they also give themselves a damage buff that can be either interrupted or dispelled offensively. So we are not too worried about that. We're just kind of slowly killing both of these things, and we've decided at this point we're going to actually not chain anything more into this pull. We're going to get re-stealth, re-pre pots in for the next pack. So one annoying thing this week also is that mechanized Peacekeepers, if there is an infested mech jockey in them, you still get the Gahunis spawned when that dies, but the nice thing is that it doesn't actually heal nearby targets while it's alive. While the mech jockey is piloting, it doesn't. Nothing actually gets the benefit from the infested heal. Also, those Peacekeepers with a mech jockey in them, they'll drop 2 stacks of Sanguine, a double pool, which is something that's a little annoying, and you gotta watch out for. It'll do more damage and healing than you would expect that a normal Sanguine pool too. Okay, so now we're doing a 4 pull. Our goal in Motherlode is basically we're going to pull all the trash we can in this first area. We think it's the easiest trash in the dungeon, and then we're going to skip all the trash we can later. And we have a couple of really innovative ways that we do that. I'm going to show you one of those very soon, right after this pull. But for now, we just need to clear this backspace because we actually need to clear quite a bit so that we have space to kite back here this week. This week is all about kiting. If the tank gets high on stacks on Necrotic, it's very important that he has space to run. So we give him the space he needs to do that by clearing all the trash that is back here so that there's a clear path that he can just keep running. We're also trying to place Necrotic or the Sanguine pools in a good place. That's always a priority this week, is making sure that you don't interfere with your kiting path or interfere with the path that you want to walk too much. It's not too big of a problem in this kind of wide open space like Motherlode, but particularly in places like Waycrest that are hallways or Tol de Gore, you're going to have Sanguine is a real problem, and you need to have a way to deal with it. One strategy that makes it easier is if you kill things evenly, you can drop Sanguines in the same spot, which is great. Okay, so now here comes the way we're going to... Normally this mech jockey pilots the Peacekeeper that's right next to it. We actually want to get it to pilot the Peacekeeper inside. So we're using Distract, Ring of Peace, and I'm moving up and we're Shining Forcing onto me, and that's going to put it in combat. But what happens is once it gets in combat, it will look for the nearest Peacekeeper, and it doesn't actually get in combat until it lands from the Shining Force there. So then the closest Peacekeeper is actually one inside that building in the front right. So that's that Peacekeeper is normally not really possible to be activated, but we've figured out a way to get it to be activated and to get the % from it. And then we're going to activate this close Peacekeeper with a different jockey, and that's going to let us. These Peacekeepers are worth a bunch of mob count, so we can, if we kill all the Peacekeepers that are active in this area, we're going to get all the % we need in this starting room, and we're not going to need to come back here for more. But that requires a lot of abilities there, right? We had to use Ring of Peace. The Distract helps because if you Ring of Peace normally, mobs are just going to keep running back into it to try and get to the spot they want to be. But if they're distracted, they won't do that. You could also do it with a CC of some kind, but then the problem is if you CC the jockeys, they won't pilot when they come out of that CC unless it gets broken really fast after they get in combat. So that's a little bit trickier. And Shining Force is really the only knock we have that gives the distance you need and also lets it not get in combat until the end of the because so like if you tried to run in there and typhoon it, you'd get in combat with the jockey and it would start trying to pilot the close peacekeeper, whereas shining forcing off of a stealth target gives you the distance you need for the peacekeeper to get piloted that you want to be piloted. So once again, now we're just pulling a bunch of peacekeepers. We're going to chain these into more stuff because we don't think that these mobs are all that dangerous. They spend a lot of time just standing there and casting. It doesn't actually have a cast bar, but they stand and they don't attack while they're casting that little disorient cloud. And then they cast this energy shield, which is completely not an ability that you have to worry about at all. They don't take damage from the front while they're casting it, but that's no big deal. They spend a lot of time casting Charged Claw, and Charged Claw turns their auto attacks to also do a Chain Lightning. So right now, if he's getting auto attacks off on the tank, it's going to chain to anybody who's right next to the tank. But even then, it's not too big of an issue. They just spend so much time casting that you don't actually take all that much damage from these things. And they're really good for Brewmaster Monks in particular. The damage pattern of like a few hard-hitting attacks every few seconds. Brewmasters are really good at dodging that kind of damage versus, high attack speed, medium damage. That's a worse profile for Brewmasters to deal with. So the fact that this profile is so good for Brewmasters is why we are pulling these so aggressively. And again, looks like our tank has had a little death issue there. Not to worry though. That happens in this place in Fortified. Even though it's this is the easiest count we can find, it's still pretty hard. As you'll see, I'm tanking 2 of these now. I'm just using evasion to stay alive while our tank runs back. We don't want to use a B-res yet because our B-reses are pretty accounted for in this place. We use our B-reses in a lot of pre-planned ways, so we only actually get a couple of B-reses to use at our discretion. So we really don't want to use any for stuff like tanks dying unless we absolutely have to, unless it would save the pull. So now we're getting these other 2 jockeys to activate, 2 peacekeepers. Those 2 you don't require a ring of peace or anything to get them to be activated. They're just you just need to pull the patrol at the right spot where the jockey is close enough, because the jockey will only pilot the closest peacekeeper if it's within like 15 yards or so. Otherwise, it just won't try and pilot anything, and that would be a disaster. We really need all of these peacekeepers to get activated. Otherwise, we're gonna have to pull trash that we don't want to pull later, and we'd much rather be killing these peacekeepers instead. Once again, we've just got an addled thug here, and once this thug dies, we're going to start chaining in even more stuff. But for the most part, we basically want to just kill everything that's not a peacekeeper, and then chain the peacekeepers that we have active into the next pull. That's our general strategy for this dungeon, and that works really well because peacekeepers have a lot more health than everything else. So you can just kind of put dots on them and then focus whatever the main target is, and eventually, 2 or 3 years later, the peacekeepers will die, and that works out great. They give a lot of count, and they're easy mobs to kill, but they do have a lot of health, so that's why we don't focus them and not pull everything else. We do pull out stuff. You see here, tank's kiting. He's got a medium amount of stacks of necrotic and just wants to get out of there to prevent the melees from hitting him. Low on cooldowns. Now he can start running back in the other direction, trying to place that sanguine in a good spot. One thing that's annoying about these thugs is that they charge, so you need to be really careful to not be under a peacekeeper when the thug is about to die, because the thug might charge you and then die under the peacekeeper and drop a pool of sanguine there. And peacekeepers, although they are easy to kill, they often will get in these kind of 5 to 10 second long cast chains where they'll go like energy shield, charge claw, shoot the disorient cloud thingy, and that will just leave them planted and completely impossible to be moved for 10 seconds. And if they do that inside a sanguine pool, like happened in the very first pool of this dungeon, they're going to heal all the way to full, and it's a disaster when that happens. So we try and avoid putting sanguine under our peacekeepers whenever possible. We're always looking for opportunities to knock mobs that are about to die away from the underneath of peacekeepers, and to keep kiting things. But with the thugs in particular, you need to be careful to not be placed such that the thug would charge through to you and then be right underneath the peacekeeper. Once again here, just killing off some Gahoonies from an infested at the start of this pull, and now we're just going to dot up the peacekeeper and kill these 3 thugs, and then we'll pull some more stuff. I'm just putting my single target stuff here into the peacekeeper, because I've got my vendetta available. I'm just going to use it on the highest health target, and then I'll evenly damage down all the thugs at the same time after putting in those dots. So one thing that we are looking for now is our Lust is about to be off cooldown. Lust, it goes on cooldown for 10 minutes, right? So the amount of Lust you get per dungeon is based on the timer, and the amount of pressure that is on you to Bloodlust immediately is based on how close that timer is to a multiple of 10, right? So if the timer is exactly 30 minutes, you're just going to get 3 lusts, and you have 10 whole minutes of wiggle room But if the timer is 32 minutes, you could theoretically get 4 lusts, but you only get to have lust off cooldown and not used for 2 total minutes in the dungeon, right? Otherwise, you can have it off cooldown for longer, but you'll only get 3 lusts. So that's something that we're always looking out for, and we're looking to get a second lust here pretty quickly. We actually have a trash pull in mind that we want to lust, and it's past the first boss. So usually what we'll do is we'll try and clear relatively quickly to that pull and then lust it. But sometimes what we do is we actually lust something else even before there and clear even more stuff in this first room. We'll have to see what... I don't actually remember how we did it this time. It's always... Pulling this area is a little bit more art than science. It depends on you know, what's going on, how the tank's feeling, how accurately we've been able to get the jockeys to pilot the right peacekeepers, because it's not 100%. Here you see a ring of peace. That's going to get that right jockey, the one that's just marked with a diamond, to pilot the correct peacekeeper. If you don't use that ring of peace, the jockey is not actually close enough at the start of the pull to pilot that peacekeeper, so we need to use it there. And I'm just sitting in stealth here for a little bit so I can try and get my 3 groats off. Only get 2 of them though because I'm bad, so that was not worth. I needed to wait another second before I came out of stealth there probably, or use Shadow Step or something to get over to the 3rd peacekeeper target. Yes, all right. Let's think of something else to discuss while we're here. Okay, so you see we're chaining in some more mobs here. Our lust is off cooldown, so we just decided we're going to bloodlust right now. And one thing that we like to do in this place is when we realize that we have a bloodlust available, is we just like to add an extra pack and then bloodlust. And with bloodlust, our tank is a lot more survivable with lust. He's both the brewmaster. He ends up being a lot more survivable when he has that haste, and he also is getting pumped a lot more heals in him because Discipline Priest scales really nicely with that bloodlust haste as well. And then all of us are also doing more damage with haste. Our AoE scales pretty well with haste on most of us, so that's we're not too concerned about saving it for a single target encounter, and particularly on Fortified Week, we just like to lust trash as often as possible because very few of the bosses are actually big threats on Fortified Week. There are a couple of places where we still like to lust bosses, but for the most part, like in Motherlode, we're pretty happy lusting trash for 3 out of our 4 lusts. Alright, so once again, you can see our tank is kiting, and he's going to take this kite and use it to pull more stuff because once again we've just got peacekeepers and 1 thug, so we've decided, all right, let's activate another peacekeeper. Refreshment vendor is the new priority here, so we're just looking to keep it down. Whenever there's a refreshment vendor in a pull, that's basically what I'm going to be looking at and what I'm going to be damaging, and I'm going to be looking for ways to stop its cast. If we don't have interrupts available, I'm going to be using kidney shot, I'm going to be using blind, all that kind of stuff to stop it from ever getting a cast off. Then once the refreshment vendor's dead, the second priority in the pack is actually the mech jockey. The mech jockey does quite a bit of damage, and it does this annoying grease gun, which is an instant cast. It casts it even if it's stunned or sapped or imprisoned or whatever. If it's in combat with you, it's going to cast this grease gun and does quite a lot of damage. It's actually really funny. We were testing this, and we had it imprisoned, and we were just next to it, and just the mob is completely frozen, right, inside the imprison, but it was still like pulling out its gun and shooting somebody with the grease gun while inside the and yeah, so even while it's stunned there, it's going to be shooting people with a grease gun, and that does a reasonable amount of damage, so we like to remove it from the pull at a higher priority than most of the other mobs in here. Adult thugs are usually the bottom of our priority list, and of course peacekeepers are the very bottom of our priority list for things to kill. But the main thing is to just get those refreshment vendors under control and kill them as fast as possible, because they're the real way that you can wipe. They kill somebody so quickly with the Ice Spritzer, and if they start getting heals off, it really makes the pull take a long time to finish. So now we're gonna finish this pull here. We're gonna kill everything completely, and then we're gonna get our stealth. That's really great news for me. Whenever a pull is pretty close and we could chain, it's great news for me in particular if we can just wait and let me get a re-stealth before we pull. But it's actually good for everybody because our pre-pots then come back off, and we can use a pre-pot on the next pull, which we do pretty often. I could be better about pre-potting every pull. I'm trying, but it's hard. I'm gonna get a week or at some point to really remind me to do it whenever it's available. So once again, pull here is thug, jockey, vendor. Kill priority is vendor, and then jockey, and then thug, and we're doing a pretty good job of executing that. It's not too important to like kill them in that order. The main thing is to not lose too much damage. So, and then you see there, Typhoon used to knock things out of Sanguine because Sanguine is really obnoxious, and now here comes the next pull, and we're looking to get the kicks over there. This is, the Hired Assassin is also a reasonably high priority, although not as high a priority as the Refreshment Vendor. The Hired Assassin does 2 things. The Hired Assassin casts Toxic Blades, and if that cast goes off, it is interruptible, but if that cast goes off, his auto attacks will start poisoning the tank, which is very obnoxious. It does a lot of damage. But the main threat is he also has this ability called Hail of Flechettes. And Hail of Flechettes is not interruptible. It is stunnable. You can stun it or interact with it in, a blind, a disorient, any sort of effect like that. Once it starts building up to doing the Halo Flechettes, and it won't recast, even if it didn't actually do its first global. But if it had gotten the Toxic Blades cast off, and then it gets any Flechettes off, each of those, it's going to apply in an AoE a stack of the poison with every throw of the Flechettes, and that's really problematic. So we need to make sure that we're at least looking at it, but even it's not as high a priority as the Refreshment Vendor there. Although what happened with that Refreshment Vendor is that our tank started kiting, and the Refreshment Vendor, one of the problems with kiting in this place, and part of the reason that Refreshment Vendors are so high priority this week, is that Refreshment Vendors stand back and kite for so long, and cast for so long. So if you are kiting, they will not come with you, and you need to either be kicking them from afar, and that means that whoever's kicking them is not under the group like me. That's what I was doing this time, is I just was stuck on that Refreshment Vendor. Or you need to just ignore them and line them and hope that they come back to you, but that's a recipe for disaster, because then they're 40 yards away casting Ice Spritzer, and it's going to kill somebody before you can get to them and stop them. So that's why we usually try and kill the Refreshment Vendors first, is because once the Vendors are dead, our tank is much more free to kite, and you can see that pull went a little bit worse because the Vendor was not killed immediately. And therefore, it stood in Sanguine and cast, and it was just a bit of a nightmare. Okay. So now we're just going to do this pull. This jockey is close enough to pilot that Peacekeeper without the help of any kind of Ring of Peace shenanigans, so we don't need to worry about that. And once again, it's an infested mech jockey. Infested mech jockeys, it's perfect to let those ones. You really need all the infested mech jockeys to get inside the Peacekeepers, because that negates most of the effect of infested on them, right? They don't do the healing on things nearby, so the only thing you need to do is kill the Gahoonies when they die, but you don't need to separate them into part of a pull with an infested and part of a pull without an infested, like you do for most other infested mobs. And if you can actually see, if you look on this mechanized Peacekeeper's bar, underneath its health plate, near the bottom right, you can see that it's got the regenerative blood debuff, but that debuff doesn't actually heal it for some reason when it's being piloted by an infested thing, so not quite sure what's going on there, but that is going on, so... Oh, I walked into the Disorient Cloud there. That's not particularly good. It does a reasonable amount of damage, but it actually, even though it says you're disoriented for 3 seconds, if you walk out of the cloud in your disorient, or if the cloud fades, then you end up getting freed from the effect, which is pretty nice. Also, if need be, you can get like gripped out. Life gripped is something that we use from time to time here. All right, and then our tank had used Ring of Peace on the pull here, so we actually end up trying to use Shining Force to move the mech jockey here, close to that far Peacekeeper. But for some reason it doesn't work. I'm not quite sure why it decided not to work that time. I think it's possible I needed to distract before I went in, because maybe the fact that it like got into that animation that happens when you get near something in stealth and chose to look at me, maybe that caused it to not then decide to try and pilot. I'm not really sure exactly why that is, but it's a real problem for us actually, that this mech jockey, like the infested mech jockeys as I was just talking about, it's really good for our route if they get the cast off, the pilots off, and now that Peacekeeper as well, we're going to have to find a creative way to pilot that Peacekeeper if we want to get the percent from it, which we do. We really want all the percent from all the Peacekeepers. Okay, so Gahoonies here, they're a really high priority, particularly on Sanguine Week. It's really problematic actually, because Gahoonies always spawn near blood, right? They always spawn from a mob that dies, and often they'll spawn in or path through blood, and that's a real feels bad, because they need to die fast before they can get the cast off. So we're really focusing on making sure that those Gahoonies are stunned outside of Sanguine and are killed before they can get their infest cast off. And we're just going to kill off this Vendor here before we move on to new things, because again, the Vendor is a priority damage target, so we don't really want to chain Vendors into other stuff. We'd rather just kill the Vendor and then start a new pull from scratch afterwards. But yeah, that pull was a bit of a problem for us. We lost some time there for sure. Now we're going to do, this mech jockey is actually close enough after the Ring of Peace to pilot the other mech, and the thugs, the thug and the assassin aren't actually linked to it. So once it pilots here, we actually don't even have to kill those. Although we should have, because they were part of our route. But our tank forgot that they were a part of our route, so he just ignored those two. But we lose the percent from those two, which we actually wanted from the thug and the assassin, and we're gonna have to make it up later. And once again, you can see the other infested jockey, that one's close enough to pilot the thing inside the building just without any help at all, and that's the Peacekeeper we're getting here. And if you look at our enemy forces now, we're in this first room. We haven't killed any bosses yet, but we're already at 75% on enemy forces. We spent a lot of time here, right? We spent already 18 minutes in the first area of the dungeon, but we're most of the way done through trash. So that's one. Have we spent 18 minutes? No, we spent 10 minutes with our first lust on cooldown. Yeah, okay, so we spent 18 minutes here. Yeah. The math checks out, because we lusted immediately and then we lusted again, and now there's 2 minutes left on our lust cooldown. Yeah, so 18 minutes. That sounds correct. And we've got almost all the enemy forces we need, and we're going to be skipping most of the trash in the rest of the dungeon. Once our lust comes up, we're going to be lusting a pull on the other side of the first boss. But first, I actually have an important mission to do this week, because of Sanguine, and I will explain exactly why once we get there, but I'm going to be splitting up from my group, and they're going to finish off a little bit more trash in this area while I do that. So yeah, this is another infested Peacekeeper. It's kind of hard to remember. A lot of weak ores that track it won't see that, but I'm not even going to bother helping to kill those Gahoons. I'm off on my stealth mission now. And the reason I'm doing this stealth mission is because there's a pull, well, not a pull, but there's a skip we want to do. We want to do a Shroud skip after we get past this area, but there are some mobs in RP combat along the way of the Shroud skip, and those mobs drop Sanguine when they die. So I'm going up here now to start that RP, because when you get close to them, they die, the mobs in RP combat up here, and you'll see them up by the Taskmaster near the top. Once those die, I need that Sanguine to drop now, so that later when we try to Shroud through here, it's actually gone. So you can see up there, those mobs all died, bunch of Sanguine up there, all of the RP is done. Now I can walk back and rejoin my group. They're killing an easy pack right now, getting some easy percent that we'd marked out earlier. It's just a Thug and 3 off-duty laborers. Off-duty laborers, of course, being non-elite mobs, so very easy to kill. And once those are dead, we're going to meet up and we're going to kill off we're going to do a pull with Lust on this side here. You can see our Lust is just about to be off cooldown, so that's what we want to do. We want to fire off another Lust. But we're actually not under that much pressure to Bloodlust, because if you look at the timer, we've got 18 minutes left on the timer, so we're only going to get 2 more Lusts anyway. And we have 8 total minutes to spare in this dungeon, where we can have our Lust off cooldown and still get 2 Lusts. So that's the way the math works there. But yeah, I'm rejoining the group. The RP is done, and now we're going to kill a bunch of these with Lust. This is another pack where there are very important casts. The Earthshapers do 2 casts. They do Rock Lance, which is a huge single target nuke that just destroys people and targets the tank or the threat target, and that's very important to be kicked. And then they also do an Earth Shield cast. The Earth Shield cast puts a healing effect on the target, but it's not actually that big of a deal because it can be Blood Elfed, it can be Purged, it can be Mass Dispelled, it can be all of those things. So we let the Earth Shield cast go through, and then we just Blood Elf those, and we save our kicks and all of our interaction for the Rock Lances. You can see I'm also taking a little bit of damage here. I think it's the Sappers or the Mine Rats like throw rocks at random people. Not 100% sure on why I'm almost dead here, but I think that's what's going on. And we actually had this pull really clean the last time we did it, but this time we have a little bit of problem here, and the problem is that those Earthshapers aren't dying first, so they're actually getting healed by Sanguine, which is a bit of a problem. The last time we did this, the Earthshapers actually died faster than this. And when I say the last time, I mean the time before this run, we had a different Motherlode 18 that we barely depleted, and this pull was a lot cleaner actually, and we didn't have this problem where our tank died and these Earthshapers kept living. But this time we did have a bit of a problem. Luckily, we just decided to use our combat res here, and we're fine. We ended up not wasting too much time on this. However, this is a spot where I think we should have pulled the boss. We should have held our Lust for 2 minutes, because, as I was saying, we have a total of 8 minutes to spare in this dungeon, where we can have our Lust be off cooldown and not use it, and still get the 2 Lusts that we want. So it's a little bit less than 8 minutes, because we don't want to use it in the last 45 seconds of the dungeon. We want to use it, 3 minutes before the end of the dungeon, so call it 5 minutes. That still gives us the wiggle room that we need to kill the boss and then update our graveyard, and then we wouldn't have had to use a B-res there. So I'm always in favor of getting the graveyard updated faster rather than waiting around, because it wouldn't have actually cost us anything on the Bloodlust count, but my group hates doing that for some reason, because they're really dumb, so that's why we didn't do that. Okay, this boss, very trivial on Fortified. One thing that we do with it is that when you knock these footballs into it, it gets this damage taken increased effect on it, but we like to wait. We like to delay kicking the third one in, because it actually refreshes the duration to full. So if you kick all 3 of them in immediately, then you're going to have however long the duration is. I think it's 10 seconds of the damage increase effect, right? But if you kick 2 in immediately, then it'll have 2 stacks of that effect, and then you can wait until it's about to expire and refresh it to 3 stacks and get a full 3 stack. So you're still going to get the same amount of time of the 3 stack, but you're also going to get the added benefit of having a 2 stack for a nice amount of time. You see here our healer ran into the Shocking Claw, died there, and that's another B-res. So now we're low on B-reses. We really need to be sure that we don't use any more B-reses for any deaths, because of course we used one on our tank earlier, and we've now used one on our healer, so now we need one for one of our skips, probably, unless our skip goes perfectly. We have 2 skips that hypothetically don't require a B-res, but often in practice do require us to use a B-res. So that's something we're looking out for. One thing you also want to do on this fight is, based on your class, you want to be using your damage cooldowns during the damage taken increased window. And that's something that will really increase your overall DPS in this fight. That's particularly good for my spec, right? Assassination Rogue, I've got a 20-second big window of damage, and that lines up really nicely. If I fire it off right before the footballs get kicked in, it'll end right when the 3 stack falls off, and that you can see it dealt 30k damage or 30k DPS on that fight, which is really nice, good number. So now it's time to use Shroud. It's important that my sprint is available for this, but first, that percent that we missed earlier, we actually are going to pick it up now from this pack here. This is not a pack that is in our route that we normally like to pull, but it is a pack that we're going to pull today because we skipped some stuff earlier that we weren't supposed to skip. So this is our adjustment on the fly. We figured out, okay, this is the percent we need, and this is going to actually be 100% for us and enemy forces. And then we just need to kill 3 bosses and not kill any more trash, and we've got about 13 minutes to do it in, which is a lot of time. And that's part of why we like doing this strategy, is because we find that the best way to convert your time into enemy forces count in this dungeon is killing all that stuff in that first room. We think it's much easier than the stuff in the rest of the dungeon. We think it's less deadly. This place is really hard on Fortified because there's a lot of deadly trash, even in that first room, but we think that it's easier than the stuff in the rest of the place. And using our ability, we really use every single class. We use some ability from each of our classes except the Demon Hunter to facilitate our skips and our piloting the weird Peacekeepers. So now it's Shroud time, and this is a really tight Shroud. You only get about a second of wiggle room on this one, so it's important that those Sanguines are dropped well, because of course Sanguine, when you take damage from Sanguine, it actually takes you out of stealth, so there's not at all any time to do a good path and not touch the Sanguine, but luckily we get through there. Barely in time. You need to have Sprint and Shadow Step available as the Rogue to make that Shroud work, so don't use them in the preceding pull in order to have them up for that. You can see here that this fight actually is working out really, really well for me because I didn't get fixated by any of the Earth Ragers, so I can just stand in the middle and AoE all of them, whereas the rest of my group all did get fixated, so they're going to do a lot less damage than me, and I'm going to get to do full damage because I don't have to kite here. And then again, on the second cast of the Earth Ragers, I also didn't get targeted by any of them, so I'm just getting to do huge damage here. This is a good spot, again, if you're a subtlety rogue. This is one of the good subtlety fights in the dungeon. It's the only real one that you can use subtlety to its full effect in this place this week, because you can't really pull trash into any of the other bosses due to necrotic, and even this is, these things die pretty quick. But we would actually, if we had a subtlety rogue, we would tell people to not AoE the Earth Shakers or the Earth Ragers, and we would just pump the damage from the subtlety rogue, having multiple targets into Azarok. However, you can see Assassination is also working out pretty well here. I think I actually will end up mousing over my damage from this fight at some point. And you can see that even though it's high, most of it actually does go into Azarok, so it's not that much padding. It's a little bit of padding, obviously I'm doing some AoE here. I'm doing less damage to Azarok than a subtlety rogue would be here, but I'm still doing a lot of priority target damage. I'm still dumping most of the combo points here into Azarok. One thing that's annoying is when Azarok empowers one of these Earth Raiders, it actually removes your poison. It doesn't make it immune to poison, it just removes any poisons you currently have active on it, so that you need to reapply your poison in order to keep getting that energy regeneration from having your bleeds ticking on a poisoned target. Alright, so this boss fight is another one of the easy ones in this place. We find it to be very trivial on most difficulties, even on Tyrannical Week. Even with, I don't think there are any affixes that really make this a pain. Explosive is maybe the hardest one for it, and even then it's pretty easy. It's just got a lot of health, so you just have to kind of stand here and hit this big rock for a couple minutes. But this is one we would consider lusting if we had lust available for it, because the lust would take a lot of time off the fight, but it's not one of the hard boss fights in here. The only boss fight we actually have trouble with ever is really the last fight in here, so we're not too worried about any of the other ones. We've got a really good strategy actually for the next boss that I'm excited to show you, because I see a lot of pugs having more difficulty with that boss than you should. It's pretty easy to handle, you just have to have good movement. Okay, so now we're going to the second skip of this place. Yeah, you can see here 51% of my damage was on the boss, whereas the rest of my group it was lower percentages because they were doing more to the ads, so still reasonably good priority target damage. If we were at a subtlety rogue here, they would be doing 80 or 90% to the main target. So you can see our druid is now stealthing around to the right. It's important that he goes on this wide stealth pack because of the masterminds. They have true sight, but it's also important there's that weapons tester that you can see just to the far right of the screen, and he casts force cannon, and if you get caught in that force cannon during the stealth, you actually are in a load of trouble. It'll take you out of stealth. If you're far enough away, you still won't get detected, but it's still bad. Now we're doing a skip here. I should be mounted. This is a bit of a mistake for me. I shouldn't be trying to walk through in stealth because I'm going to get detected by the true sight mobs anyway. But I can still walk through here and try and get a vanish. The main thing is that we don't want our druid to get in combat because we don't want to have to use a battle res here, and we succeeded in that. We failed in me getting through without dying, so that cost us 5 seconds. Normally I'm able to get through here as well and then vanish, and as long as you're far enough away from the masterminds when you vanish, you will drop combat with them. But I failed at doing that this time, so that cost us 5 seconds that didn't need to cost, and I used my vanish, which is a DPS cooldown, and it didn't help, so it's really the worst of all worlds there. And then I got a weird bug there. There's a bug sometimes where when you resurrect, you briefly start at the location where you died instead of at the location where you're supposed to be. So I resurrected, and for a split second, I was actually where my corpse was, and that was in the oil where you take damage, and so that actually procced my cheat death, which is really brutal. I find that bug really annoying. It's particularly annoying on like Gahoon. If you take a resurrection from upstairs after the boss has respawned, you'll sometimes pull the boss due to the same bug. So here our strategy with this boss is that she does a pretty simple pattern. She does 2 shoots of those azurite pools, and then she does the propellant blasts. And the propellant blasts are always aimed at one person, so we aim the first one over to the right, and then the second one over to the left. Now you can see here, it's supposed to be knocking it away from her, but due to creative coding in the game, you can actually see the propellant blast is pulling some of the pools towards her. So that's weird. That's among the weirdest it's ever been for us, but our strategy is still working out okay here. We did take a little bit more damage than we're supposed to, but it doesn't really matter. Again, it's a fortified boss. Nobody's in too much danger of dying. And now our goal is to just bait these azurite things behind us to the middle of the room, and then we're just going to pull the boss forward a little bit into that safe spot, which is where we walked into the room. Our priest uses Leap of Faith there to pull our boomkin in so that he can bait the propellant blast effectively. And I used my Cloak of Shadows there to immune a chemical burn, which chemical burn is also an ability that can be problematic. It gets placed on 2 people, the 2 nearest targets to her, and it's a magic damage dot. And once again, you can see the propellant blast not working quite as intended on that one pool of azurite, but no big deal. So what we do, you can dispel. We use mass dispel to take care of 2 of them at a time sometimes, but otherwise, without cloak or something, that's going to be on one person, it's going to be dispelled from the other person, and one person is going to have to get healed. But yeah, with this strategy, it's a pretty simple dance. It's just bait twice towards the middle, and then pull her to the edge here, and then we shoot the propellant to one side, then we shoot propellant to the other side, and that makes it pretty straightforward. And the boss is, as you can see, about to die here pretty quickly as well. Pretty short fight. Now we have 6.5 minutes to finish this place. We don't have to kill any more trash. We just have to execute this skip. And the skip we can execute without using a battle res, and that would be great if we could. Otherwise, we can just use a battle res, but we'd rather not. So I'm going to start by distracting this war machine so that our druid can sneak by. You can maybe sneak right through the middle if you don't have a distract, but it's a lot harder. With the distract, you can be a lot closer to the one that is distracted. Now our druid is going on a stealth mission up to the left-hand side here. Once he's far enough along in his route that he's feeling comfortable, the rest of our group, you can see on the minimap, is going to start the run to the top. And the goal here is going to be our tank is going to hold threat for long enough for our druid to walk through. Our tank is going to pull that pack from right in front of the boss over to the right-hand side, and our druid is then going to sneak through on the left-hand side. And then our priest is going to die within resurrection range and line of sight of where our druid is. So you can see she's doing a good job right now of getting into that spot where she wants to die, right up in that fire circle. And the rest of us are just going to die over here. I can also skip through here without dying, but I did not do it this time. It's easy to do with Vanish, and I didn't have Vanish available, but it's also possible to do it without Vanish. But it's no big deal. Again, it just costs us 5 seconds. The main success case for this is we don't have to use a B-Res because our druid managed to get through without getting into combat, and because our priest died within out of combat res range and line of sight. So then she takes the res, she mass reses everybody, we eat our feast, and we've got 5 minutes to do this last boss fight. This last boss fight takes a lot less than 5 minutes, particularly on Fortified. On Tyrannical, high Tyrannical, it can sometimes take 4.5, but this week, not too bad at all. So we're going in, we're bloodlusting on pull because it's the best way to get damage, and this fight is not particularly hard on Fortified. We don't need bloodlust to help us, stabilize coming out of the intermission like we do on Tyrannical. And then we're just doing this boss fight is pretty obnoxious. The overlaps between those Boomba explosions, the orange swirlies, and the Gatling gun can be pretty deadly, so we have to be careful of those. And they can come at a bunch of different timings. So the main thing is to make sure that the boss is in a safe spot, in a spot where there aren't going to be orange swirlies, so that people can then dodge around the boss without having to worry about being hit by an orange swirly. But it's particularly difficult for ranged because they actually have to be moving in and out to bring those homing missiles, which only target ranged, outside of the group. That's the big orange circle around the missile that targets people. And then once the boss gets to 50%, which you can see here happened extremely quickly, it took like 30 seconds or something, then we get to this intermission. There are these 2 Sky Scorchers that come out, and there are these huge orange circles. They actually are even bigger than they look. You can die if you like think you're outside of that circle. It happens to people all the time, actually, in my experience. But the rest of this is pretty simple. We just want to kill these Sky Scorchers. That Azurite Heartseeker is interesting. It can actually remove stacks of the boss's shield. The way this phase works is that the boss has 3 stacks of a shield, and then every time he casts Drill Smash, if you can bait it onto one of those drill bit things that's sticking up out of the ground, he'll lose a stack of the shield. But also sometimes if you bring the Azurite Heartseeker through the boss, and it hits the boss, then it'll remove the shield that way too. I'm not really clear on when exactly it does and when it doesn't, because it's been a little inconsistent for us, but sometimes we've faced this boss really fast to do that. But yeah, you can see there we got all 3 of our Drill Smashes onto good targets. That's good too, because if you miss any of those, you're going to get extra Drill Smashes, and they do a lot of raid damage. Okay, so now we need to go to the safe spots. We've marked the 6 different potential safe spots in the room, and 2 of them will be safe at any given time, because 1 row and 1 column are always unsafe in this little grid here. So we usually just say something like circle and diamond are safe, or circle and triangle are safe, and then we move our whole group over to there, and we move the boss. The main thing is to get the boss into the safe spot faster than you would expect, because sometimes the boss starts casting. The boss will just be like, okay, I'm going to plant here, I'm going to cast Gatling Gun, and I'm going to cast Homing Missile, and if he decides to do that, and you weren't quick to move him to the safe spot, and then the Boombas fire off, and then he's doing Gatling Gun in a danger zone, there just can be nowhere in the room that's safe. If that does happen, you need to run through the Gatling Gun against it, so you need to run not in the same direction as the Gatling Gun, but as close as possible to the boss in the opposite direction that the Gatling Gun is turning, and you'll take as few ticks as possible. The ticks won't actually one-shot you. You can take a couple hits of them, and you can see our Druid actually does it all the time because he loves to maximize damage and stand-in mechanics. That's kind of his style. And then, yeah, the boss dies. You got to kill the Goblin as well. Be careful to not forget about that, particularly if you pull it out of the boss room, it'll reset, and that's a tragedy. But that's how we managed to defeat this timer. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Remember to subscribe and everything, and there will be more of these coming soon. See you for the next one.